There's no reason why you should particularly. So let me give you a little autobiographical sketch. And then Mary said, talk a little bit about what I learned in the campaign for governor, which is fair to do, and then what I'm thinking about now. And if I can do all that in about 6 minutes, then we'll just chat about whatever you want to talk about. So, autobiography. We were talking about where people were from originally. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which is why snow doesn't freak me out.
I spent half my childhood in St. Louis. My grandparents lived there.
Now, back in the old days.
Yeah.
St. Louis is a great place to be from.
Yeah.
Everybody says, how about those Cardinals, the baseball team?
I spent a week there one night.
Yeah, it can do that.
No.
It can do that to you. It can do that to you. But it is Midwestern core, down to earth values. My dad sold cameras for a living, and so he was all about small business and education, which was a big deal in our family. I have an older brother, and for our family, making sure that my brother and I got good schooling was a big deal. And so that's deep into the family belief system. I went off to college in Massachusetts, went to Oregon in the early 70s. Early on, went to work in the mayor's office in Portland in 1971, 72. And it's 71, 72 is a long time ago. But the interesting thing, among other things, was in 1971, 72, if you told somebody you were going to get into politics, people thought, that's great, that's civic engagement. And if you told them you were going to start a business, they'd say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why would you do something so small and uninteresting? Fast forward to 2015, if you say to somebody you're going to run for office, they say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And you're going to start a business or be an entrepreneur, they say, that's great, that's so exciting. So I've done both, and I value both. Portland quickly in 70, 71, 72 was at a moment of decision. Today, if you read the New York Times, you read the national press, Portland is probably one of the most celebrated cities in America because of livability, sustainability, urban planning, high quality of life, a really intelligent approach to not just the city, but the whole state of Oregon. Oregon is only one of 2 states in the country that has statewide land use planning, which was a big deal in the early 70s to contain sprawl, protect farmland, actually create a strategy for livability over time. And we can talk about that. I actually, in the course of running for governor, I saw many parallels between Oregon and New Mexico at pivotal points. So I worked in the mayor's office for 6 years roughly, left to go into back into journalism, which had been my first love. The mayor then became Secretary of Transportation when Jimmy Carter was president, went back to DC for the last 2 years of the Carter presidency, working as an assistant to the Secretary of Transportation. When Mr. Reagan beat Mr. Carter, I was recruited to go up to the Harvard Business School and work on a book on the future of the auto industry. And that took 2 or 3 years. At the end of it, they said, well, we're still paying you, why aren't you doing anything? And sent me to work at the Harvard Business Review. I moonlighted writing speeches for Michael Dukakis when he was governor of Massachusetts. To answer the question you're all thinking, no, I did not tell Michael Dukakis to get in that tank. He was a great governor. He was a little bit above his pay grade when he ran for president. I ended up running the Harvard Business Review for about 7 years, which was a great free education. I did not get an MBA, but I learned a lot and made a lot of friends in business all over the world, because HBR is a global publication. Around 1993, I left HBR to work with a guy named Bill Taylor, and we raised the money to start Fast Company magazine. It launched formally in '95, so this is the 20th anniversary of Fast Company. and it became the fastest growing business magazine in the history of the United States, focusing on entrepreneurship, innovation, change, which are still the themes of our time, I believe. Stayed there till it was sold in 2000 to Bertelsmann, German publishing company. Bill Taylor and I stayed till 2003, and then turned it over to other people. And then I came to New Mexico. And so my wife and I have been here since then, and I've been writing books and traveling and speaking and consulting. 2 years ago, I looked at the state, I looked at our economy, I looked at our leadership, and my conclusion was that I didn't think we were doing very well, and that I couldn't think of a reason not to try to run for governor. It was a lot like starting Fast Company. I couldn't think of a reason not to start Fast Company. And I knew that if I didn't try, I'd be very disappointed in myself 10 years from now. So I started with zero name recognition, and that's actually a bad thing. It turns out. But I think what I brought to the campaign was good energy, insight, experience. I was a little bit of an anomaly in New Mexico and in the Democratic Party in that I combined a background in business and entrepreneurship with progressive values. And so I've been describing myself as a pragmatic progressive, which I think is what you guys are. Or if you're not, you should be. Because it's what New Mexico needs, and it's absolutely what the New Mexico business community needs. If I have any, in candidate school, they teach you at any meeting you have to have an ask that you put out on the table. So my ask for you all is to consider being pragmatic progressives and voices of the business community that we don't have much of in New Mexico. I've traveled around a lot in the course of the campaign, and then since the campaign I've stayed engaged. I've spent time all over the state, and there is a business community. From my point of view, the problem is that it tends to be more, as a group, interested in what I would consider to be old status quo thinking than progressive change thinking. And it tends to embrace what it perceives to be its own self-interest, but what I believe is very short-sighted and not really self-interested, but actually...
So like getting a CRS tax exemption for selling my widgets, is it right? I mean, that's what the business community always seems to do.
And a race to the bottom. How do we minimize? What's our cheapest solution? Not our best solution. Not our most intelligent investment strategy. So it's cost minimization, investment minimization, and not really strategic thinking about a future investment that makes sense going forward.
And it's interesting, our group, which is basically a bunch of consultant types, trusted advisors, and what we run into is people think I can do it in New Mexico. I can do it myself.
Yeah, I know.
Why should I pay somebody to do that?
I know.
If I can do it myself, whether it's accounting, marketing, strategy,
architecture.
Yeah.
Why hire an architect when the builder will just throw up my cheap building for me?
Yeah.
And the result is, I think, we end up shorting ourselves. The example that I'm personally passionate about right now with the upcoming state legislative session is the campaign to make New Mexico a right-to-work state. And I've just finished with a friend producing a white paper that we're going to be putting out that asks the question, is right to work right for New Mexico? And if you actually look at the data, as opposed to just dwelling in the land of political ideology, if you look at the data, it tends to show that in the country at large, right to work states historically have had a small bump in employment. Not all of which can be attributed to being a right to work state. So cause and effect is not clear. But what is clear is that people earn less in right-to-work states. and that you have a real loss of disposable income as you chase workers to the bottom by cutting back on benefits and wages. The other thing that's funny about right to work as an example is that people don't know what it means. It's kind of part of the problem of New Mexico, of American politics today. The language, as trusted advisors, you know that framing and clarity of expression is really critical. So if you say we're a right to work state, that sounds great. I'm in favor of everybody having the right to work. That is not what it means. What it means is that if I work at a company that is represented by a union and I don't want to join the union, I don't have to. In a non-right to work state, New Mexico today, I still have to pay a small fee to get the benefits of the union bargaining formula. So I'm not a free rider. In a right to work state, I don't have to pay any fee at all, but I get all the benefits of the union's bargaining on my behalf. Well, why would anybody at that point pay a fee? I want everything for free too. I want to be able to play golf at the country club without having to join the country club. I want to eat at the restaurant without having to pay my meal tab. So it is a way of essentially undermining organized labor, not getting higher wages and benefits for workers. Federal law today says nobody can be compelled to join a union. That's not even an issue. So if somebody argues, well, we need to become a right to work state to protect people from having to join unions, the answer is, sorry, you don't have your facts straight. Federal law says nobody has to join a union, period.
Excuse me, do you have any comment on the article that was in last Friday's Business Journal? Because they led with the right to work issue and supposedly surveyed national organizations, and of the 6, only one said it was not an issue. One said for sure yes, the others said maybe.
I didn't happen to see that piece, but I've done this couple-month-long white paper process, and it's really interesting to see what actually are the facts versus the opinions. So the most interesting case study at the Harvard Business School, everything is taught as a case study. So the case study that I looked at was Oklahoma, which became a right to work state in 2000. Previously, it was not. Its economy was fine. It was the same claims we're hearing in New Mexico were made in Oklahoma, that it's putting the quote-unquote welcome mat out for businesses. You'll get many more people moving. You'll get companies will consider your state that wouldn't previously, none of which turned out to be true. And in fact, since Oklahoma became a right to work state, manufacturing employment has declined, and more companies have moved from Oklahoma to China, because it's the companies you attract as a right to work state are bottom feeders. They want to go where the costs are cheap, so they'll come briefly and then they'll go to where it's cheaper next. So I would be anytime you hear a claim, including my own, I would say ask for data, ask for examples. There's a piece that Paul Gessing did recently saying that the highest employment growth states in America are all right to work states. Well, that's probably true, but it's not because they're right to work states.
It's because they got oil.
Well, or mining. The number one employment growth state in America right now is North Dakota. North Dakota is a right to work state, but it also has oil, gas, and fracking. And until this current plunge in oil prices, North Dakota has been on a tear. If they were not a right to work state, they'd still be on a tear because you can't move the oil somewhere else. So you're all strategists and thinkers. Ask why. Okay, this may be true. Well, is it causation or just correlation?
This particular article, I don't know if anybody else at the table has read it, but this particular article, they interviewed companies around the United States that work with corporations that want to move to another state,
Right.
and they were asking them, is right to work an issue for the people with whom you deal? And
one said yes, and
one
four
said yes, one said no, I think, and the other said maybe. But when you read the maybe explanation, it seems that it is an issue for many companies that these particular consultants work with.
Well,
So
let me flip it a little bit of a different way, because I don't think the issue ultimately is right to work. I think it's symptomatic of a bigger problem, which is how do we think about the economic future of New Mexico? And one of the things that I learned in Oregon and have believed to be true of New Mexico is what we have is something very special in New Mexico. We are a very different kind of state. And we are not a state of large corporations. We're not a state where companies move to set up headquarters. We're a state of small, medium-sized businesses. We're a state of natural resources. We're a state of tourism. We're a state of farming, ranching, agriculture. We're a state of art and culture. We're a state where there is science and technology. We don't have one economy. We've got about 9 different microeconomies. And what I tried to promote in my campaign, and what I've been talking about ever since, is this notion of the 9 sub-economies of New Mexico. And that if we're really creative about our future, we're not going to win by being cheaper than Texas or dirtier than Arizona. We're going to win by being smarter about what makes New Mexico, New Mexico. And that's small, medium-sized companies that need help, need assistance, need guidance, need professional strategy work, can really benefit by a government that wants to partner with them at the state and local level and not worry about, will we get Tesla? No, we are not going to get Tesla. End of story. And it has nothing to do with right to work or not right to work. So I think if you one of the things you learn in business and in politics both is if you ask the wrong question, you're going to get the wrong answer. So the wrong question is, how do we lure more companies to New Mexico? That's not the right question. The right question is, how do we take advantage of what we have that is really remarkable about our state and build on that from the grassroots up?
Yeah, but isn't education a part of
Critical.
that?
Absolutely.
Because, I wrote a book about learning, and people love it, but they don't have any money to buy it. We have people involved in this organization who have a fantastic program for young people to figure out what they want to do with their lives and what kind of education they need and what kind of work they would be good at and everything. And they can't, there's nobody there that'll help pay for it.
Yeah. This is what I describe as the iron triangle of New Mexico that we got to break. It's poverty at the top, underperforming schools, and then low-paying jobs. And it's a vicious cycle. If you start in poverty, the data are very clear, you are less likely to do well in school. If you do less well in school, you're less prepared to have a good job. If you're less prepared to have a good job, you're going to stay in poverty. And so I don't think it's a one shot, it's not a silver bullet problem. This is why it has to be a strategy. This is why things like, thinking about the legislative session, guy down in Las Cruces, Steve Fishman, is promoting a cap on payday lending. Currently, if you are a veteran, the federal government says you are not ever going to pay more than 36% for a loan. Now that's high to begin with, but it's better than the 150, 200% that people get trapped into. Steve is promoting a piece of legislation in this upcoming session saying we ought to cap all payday lending in New Mexico at 36%. Watch this bill closely to see what happens at the legislature. That won't solve poverty, but it begins to get into this cycle. Poverty, education. Okay, what do we want to do about schools in New Mexico? I think early childhood education is the smartest investment we can make. If you look at the data, again, this isn't ideology or right-wing, left-wing, Democrat, Republican. All the data say Everything that happens in brain formation, in family preparation, has to do with early childhood education. Kids who show up their first day of school, who come from a poor, underprivileged family without any preparation, are a year and a half behind the first day of school. And it gets worse over time. So you begin to look at it as a system, and then you think, where do we intercede to make a difference? Where do you want to put your dollars? Do you want to put it in a $50 million closing fund to chase out-of-state corporations? Or do you want to put it into a fund to help small and medium-sized businesses in New Mexico do better, so they pay more, so there's less poverty, so schools are better, so people can afford to buy your book or hire your consulting services? To me, it's a no-brainer. I'm sorry, I get carried away.
No. I really get motivated by people who talk about education, because I do believe that's the key to our economy. And I understand the hesitance from a macro perspective is we're used to, in New Mexico, creating talent, and it leaves.
It leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they come back,
Yes.
okay, but they're usually in retirement. So what we're doing is importing wealth
Right.
that's not producing anything in the state of New Mexico.
Correct.
And it's always perplexed me, because I find Albuquerque in particular to be one of the most entrepreneurial cities I've ever encountered. And I've lived all over the country. Yet, the people here don't know how to think outside the box when it comes to progressive business ideas.
That's why my ask is for you all to become part of that voice. I think there is a competing mindset, and it's not just in Albuquerque, it's around all of New Mexico. I talked about it in my campaign as tradition plus transition. That we shouldn't try to think we have to, rebuke ourselves for our past. We've got an incredible past that the rest of the country ought to know about. But we can't be captive to it. So if we can embrace the traditions that make New Mexico remarkable. You go to, you hang out in Truchas, and you hang out in Los Alamos, and anywhere. Yeah. The history and the tradition and the authenticity is amazing.
And the brain power.
And the history of
places out of northern New Mexico you've never heard of, and people have made amazing contributions to society. Exactly.
Whether it's as as entrepreneurs or as local heroes, they're incredible. So I am all in favor of telling the story of New Mexico's history. But then I want to pivot and say, now we got to transition, because we're part of a knowledge economy. We are no longer in an economy where status quo wins. And by the way, when we wrote about the knowledge economy in Fast Company, we wrote about cab drivers as being part of the knowledge economy. Anybody can be a knowledge worker if you think about yourself that way. How do I add value in the way I do my job? That's the knowledge economy. We did a piece about a cab driver in New York City who had the best practices of any cab driver I've ever encountered. You'd get in the cab, it looked like any other cab, except in the back seat, he had neatly lined up that day's newspapers, magazines, everything you could ever want as a cab rider to make the trip pleasant. And how big were his tips at the end of the ride, right?
Did he have martinis?
He did not feed us alcohol.
He would now need to have an iPad change.
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't be far-fetched.
Yeah. In Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence, he starts with a beautiful anecdote about a cab or a bus ride in Manhattan that changed his life as a psychologist, because this bus driver opened the miracles of the city to everybody on the bus, telling them about an event here or an opening at the Metropolitan. It was a great example of what you're talking about.
That's a knowledge work.
Yeah.
And years ago, small anecdote, but years ago when I was at HBS, I did a book on the future of the auto industry, and one of the things that lives in my mind was a trip I paid to a Toyota production factory in Toyota City. And this was a long time ago, like 25 years ago, at the peak of the Japanese auto success. I'm walking around the Toyota factory, and the manager says to me, we have a tool in our factory that you don't have in U.S. auto factories. And I worked for the Secretary of Transportation. I toured River Rouge. I knew what an auto factory looked like. So I'm looking around, and there's all the familiar machine tools and assembly line. I said, okay, I give up. What is it? And he reached into his pocket and he took out a pencil. He said, we give all of our workers a pencil. And when they see something that they think we could do better, they write it down. So I got home and I went to Detroit and I sat down with the people at General Motors. And I said, okay, their people have pencils. Why don't our people have pencils? And the guy at General Motors says it wouldn't matter. More than 50% of our workers are functionally illiterate. That's why education and jobs and poverty are so intertwined. You could be the cheapest right-to-work state in America, and if you don't have a well-prepared, well-educated, motivated, knowledge-based workforce, you're not going to have an economy.
What do you think is the most productive and lasting way to direct education, target it to people's skill sets and where their future lies?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that come quickly to mind. Number one is I think you build that conversation from the ground up. Even if you feel frustrated because people can't buy into it right now, that's exactly what folks have to be thinking about. You know, how do I add value through my work life? It's a different question than how do I make a good wage. And that's the big change that global competition and technology has created, is that everybody is a value creator. This is one of the people who invested in Fast Company was Tom Peters from consulting fame, and his article in Fast Company was cover story, the brand called you. Everybody's a brand.
That changed my life.
Well,
I was stuck in corporate America in a toxic job, and I said, you know what, I may have a crap job, but I don't have to do a crap job. So Tom Peters and that one article in Fast Company really did change my perspective. And I have people coming to me after that saying, well, Mary, how do I do such and such? Because I just thought, how can you be so positive when you're...
That's your brand.
Yeah.
And what you were saying to yourself was, every day I want to find a way to add value.
Absolutely.
So if you're talking to folks who are young and they're looking for a future, you say, okay, the world is going to change 20 times between now and the time you hit 65. So don't even think about the notion of a lifelong one-job career. Most people don't have that anymore. It's 5, 6 turns of your career. I have a daughter who's 32. She went to architecture school. And I said to her, don't think about being an architect. Think about design as a skill. My one and only meeting with Steve Jobs, just to entertain you all for a minute. Because Steve Jobs is a cool guy. He was a complete jerk, but he was a cool guy. So in the Harvard Business Review, we wrote an article, we carried an article called The Computerless Computer Company. It was by 2 guys from MIT, and what it talked about was the best computer companies don't sell computers, they sell computing. And the way I internalized the message very simply was, the future of business is verbs, not nouns. So I was at Palo Alto, I was at Stanford for HBR giving a talk, and this guy came up to me afterwards. Turns out it was Steve Jobs, and he said, I love that article. You're absolutely right. The future is verbs, not nouns. And if you look at what Apple has done, that's what they've done. It's apps, not machines. So I said to my daughter, don't think about being an architect. You may or may not be an architect, but if you go to architecture school, you will have design skills, problem-solving skills, thinking skills, visual skills, graphic skills. Those verbs are really important.
You know, I think Fast Company is one of the most, I'm not trying to ingratiate myself with you, but Fast Company...
It's okay, it's working.
It's one of the most important publications this country's ever seen, only because of its prescience. I mean, I remember reading George Gilder talking about the new economy That's stuck with me ever since, and I can look at AT&T today and see that he saw the future a long time ago.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that magazine opened up people's minds to the possibilities of business and technology.
I think there's a new issue out with it's the current group that's running the magazine has a letter from the editor, and it says, this is the 20th anniversary of Fast Company, and Bill and I they credit us with being right about a number of things. I think we are directionally correct about a bunch of things. The first cover says work is personal. That's right, work is personal. It's not the corporation, it's the individual. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you can do. Computing is social. I mean, if I'd actually taken my own advice, I would have started Facebook. And then I would have been Mark Zuckerberg, but I didn't. But if you think about computing is social. So in other words, what the digital revolution does is connect us all in ways that none of us could have anticipated. Fundamentally transformed how people work, connect, communicate. Those ideas were accurate. And it goes back again, just let me make it local about New Mexico for a minute. So what can we all do if we care about New Mexico? I think what we do is exactly what you're describing with Fast Company. I think everybody in this room, if we sat down, if we all had 3x5 cards and we did a little brainstorming session, we said, what's the future going to be like? We'd all pretty much agree on a few fundamental characteristics. Energy is going to matter, right? Authenticity is a great value because everything is becoming more and more homogenized. The fact that New Mexico is authentic, different, that's a huge competitive advantage. The fact that we have so much renewable resources, energy being one of them, huge competitive advantage. Education is critical. If you're not well educated, you can't compete. We could dope out what we think the future is going to look like. I don't think we would argue about a lot. And then if you had over here a list of the things that the state's currently focusing on, and you tried to match them up, you'd say, holy mackerel, there's a big gap. We know what the future is going to be like, and we're stuck doing things that won't get us to the future. And that's where business leaders have to play a role. People don't want to look that clearly at reality. It's too painful, or they don't know what to do about it, or they're busy just making it through the day. So folks like you, who do see the future very clearly, and me, who arguably tried to articulate it, we ought to all be saying, this is what's going to happen in 2020. 5 years from now, we know what it's going to be like. And if we don't begin to shift our strategy, our resources, our politics, our business conversations toward the future we know is coming, we'll still be behind. And that to me is what I'm passionate about. One of the things we said about Fast Company, I'm very proud of this, so I'm kind of grinning a little bit. We said in the first letter from the editors that Bill and I wrote, we said, the world is changing and business is changing the world. Number one, business is the most powerful tool for creating positive change. Then we said about Fast Company, we don't want to be the last word in a conversation about change. We just want to be the first word. We want to start a productive dialogue about how companies, individuals, institutions can move us toward the future. And that's still the agenda. The right conversation is a very powerful tool for making a difference in New Mexico or in the business community at large.
What is your game plan?
I am continuing, I'm not going to disengage. I'm continuing to stay involved in the political and economic issues of New Mexico. I'm trying right now to set up a little nonprofit, so I'll have a platform and do these things like white papers, blogs, op-ed pieces, speeches, and then another part of the nonprofit would put me in touch with entrepreneurs and innovators who are looking for counsel and mentorship so I can be a helper to try to grow the economy from the grassroots up. I agree with you. We have a huge opportunity in innovation and entrepreneurship. I said in my campaign, the future of New Mexico is hiding in plain sight. Everywhere I went, there are people doing interesting, smart, grassroots stuff. They don't have enough help. They don't have enough throwaway. They don't have enough people in the community to talk to. So I want to be a kind of a collector of talent around entrepreneurship.
What do you think about these economic development organizations and things that are going on here?
I think we have to help them. I mean, the fact is it's the right instinct, I believe. The big juxtaposition I believe in is, do you think the future of New Mexico comes from trying to throw incentives at out-of-state corporations to bring them here, or do you want to use our resources to grow what we've got?
And my understanding is that a lot of these are focusing, you got organizations like West and so on, that are really focusing on the people who are here already. Let's help them. Forget about the guys out of state.
Right.
We still may want them.
If they come, that's great.
But let's help those who are here.
I agree with that. And I believe that there is beginning to be a critical mass of folks who have that philosophy. By the way, it's not that we don't want people to move here. Mm-hmm. I think, again, strategically, the way you get people to want to be here is by having something for them to want to be here for. So if we've got a vital entrepreneurial community, people will say, well, that's where the action is. I want to be there. Not, we're flat on our backs, we'll bribe you to come here. I think once we start putting these pieces together in a strategy with West and other organizations that say, let's maximize what makes New Mexico special. Let's take our technology, our entrepreneurs, let's begin to do more work with younger entrepreneurs. Let's teach coding in the schools. You know, it always blows my mind that I'm not a big math whiz, and I did pass algebra, but I never used it. But I would use coding if I knew how to code. We ought to have coding clubs in every school in New Mexico. I'm going to do a little Skype call with a high school group in Las Cruces next month that says, we've got an entrepreneurship club, will you Skype in and talk to us? I said, absolutely. Did it last year. 4 of the kids came up and sat down with Jared Tarbell at his Levitate studio. They'd never been outside Las Cruces. They'd never met a real live entrepreneur. They'd never seen a 3D printer before. These connections are waiting to be made. So a lot of what I think all of us can do is connect people who have the right instincts, the right values, the right vision, but they don't know what they don't know. So 4 kids from Las Cruces who get to meet Jared Tarbell and see what a 3D printer looks like, they were off the moon, right? And it's a pretty cool story because they're down in Las Cruces, they're high school kids, they don't have any money, they don't have a car. They find somebody who'll drive them up to Albuquerque. They pool their money to pay the gas. They get the teacher to approve it. They come up and boom, all of a sudden they are the toast of this event at Jared Tarbell's new Levitate workshop. They went back to Cruces. I got to believe their lives were really changed.
So isn't one of the challenges, it takes, the business community can't do it alone. Government has to be
right,
a positive participant.
And a good partner.
Yeah, because it won't work. And I was curious about you, when you talked about the Portland thing, I was in Phoenix at the time, you were in Portland, and I watched what happened when civic leaders and the community got on board. And
right.
It's amazing.
It's very powerful.
And that is clearly not happening in New Mexico today.
Not at the moment.
Not at the level, at least not the level that it needs to be,
yeah,
to really make a change.
I agree. And so the question that you have to ask yourself is, where does it start? And again, if you go back to that declaration of values in Fast Company, the world is changing and business is changing the world. I think for the most part, governments in general are responsive and reactive. That's just their nature. Every once in a while you get lucky and you get a mayor or a leader who wants to get out in front, but it's risky. You get arrows in your back. But if the business community steps up and says to the leader, the elected group, look, you think you're helping us, but you're not. You believe that what we want is lower taxes and cut the minimum wage and reduce environmental regulation and we'll be happy. That actually, we know that doesn't work. We've seen the future, and the future is all about livability, sustainability, authenticity, high quality, not a race to the bottom. So please help us by doing things that really help us. And that is the things that happened in Portland and elsewhere. Portland's not the only example. Minneapolis has a pretty good track record. Denver went from being a cow town that was sprawling all over to now it's really the toast of the West. Same with Boulder. I think 4 out of the top 10 entrepreneurial cities in America are in Colorado today. And they're not getting there by sacrificing quality of life, environmental standards, or anything else. They're doing it by asking a fundamental question. Why would anybody want to live here? And the answer is great quality of life, an active engagement from the business community in partnership with the political group that's trying to make life better, and everybody wins when you get a positive feedback loop going. Right now, I think we're sort of trapped in this negative feedback loop, and everybody's unfortunately kind of embracing the race to the bottom rather than investing in things that are smart for the future.
I also think that it's important for business to be involved in education. We moved here from Seattle 5 years ago. Boeing was very involved in the community college education because when they needed workers to do certain jobs, they helped fund the community colleges to have training programs put in so they could train their employees.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's part of what you were asking. There's a great example and some of it is here in Albuquerque, and we shouldn't short circuit the fact that there's a lot of that stuff happening right now. I have a friend in Pittsburgh named Bill Strickland who runs a program there called the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. And Bill takes at-risk kids and using art and craft gets them through school. But what he did that made the program amazing was to go to Pittsburgh's employers and say, you tell me what you want and I'll train kids to do it. Reverse engineer. Mm-hmm. If you start with what the market wants, I can give it to you. And Boeing or Microsoft, there was a piece on the web yesterday saying Elon Musk is opening a SpaceX program in Seattle, and he claims he's going to be hiring 1,000 engineers in Seattle to do his SpaceX program in Seattle. How happy is Seattle?
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do, again, with a race to the bottom. It's got to do with good education, well-trained workers, people who are prepared to do the work of the future.
Well, I've read articles here that say that there are jobs available here and they can't find qualified workers.
Right.
So how do you get people from out of state who might be qualified to come here for what would probably be good paying jobs?
Yes. During the campaign, I talked to the guy who was the economic development director for Hobbs and Roswell and people in that part of New Mexico. He was saying to me, we are bringing nurses over from Texas, putting them up, paying them to come, paying them to stay in motels, paying their food bill, because we don't have nurses who we're training in New Mexico. They've got an airplane painting facility down there. They're flying people from Colorado to paint the airplanes that are on the ground in southern New Mexico. If you thought entrepreneurially, you'd say, okay, we know where the jobs are going to be, and if we don't know, we'll go ask the business community. They'll tell us. That's what they do for a living, right? You guys do that for a living.
If they're continuing to paint airplanes, don't you think it would be less expensive and more productive for them to have a training program for people and teach them how to do that and then hire them?
Yes.
The schools don't allow it. It used to be there was on-the-job training, OJT,
Yeah.
and now there's so many liabilities and everything that they will not let a kid go off into a business and learn something. It's sad. If you go to India, what you see everywhere are schools that are specialty schools. And so the kids take their passion and they follow their passion, and it's kind of a Renaissance education. But here we have Common Core. It's a mess. Everybody's a rubber stamp. Everybody's bored out of their mind. There is no real education. If in the very beginning they had, if they had reading, writing, arithmetic, and research, where kids could find out what they want, then it'd be a completely different situation. No OJT. How can a kid pursue their passion when they're blocked by the very education system that we have?
And it's interesting because the guys from BV Allen who have Career Insights, that's exactly what they do. They help young people figure out, and even adults, figure out what their passion is and what kind of work they want to do, and then they help show them how to make the connections to people who can help them, like bringing the kids in from out of town. They teach them how to do that. Now, I've seen them do that, and it just absolutely amazing.
It's not like this isn't doable. I think part of the problem in places like the folks I was talking to in southern New Mexico is and this is not just New Mexico, this is corporate America too, to your point about your experience. You get trapped doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's easier to do what we're doing because it's a short-term palliative than to think, how do I get ahead of the curve and do it differently? It takes transition and money and investment and leadership to break out of the habit and move ahead. And so what you're doing on the ground appears to be working. We're meeting the need. But it isn't setting you up to succeed in the future because it's a short-term solution. And I also think, I don't think it's right to bash New Mexico unilaterally. There are a lot, when you travel around the state, one of the good things about running for office is you get to see a lot of good stuff. There are amazing on-the-ground experiments and programs going on. I saw incredible stuff and teachers doing incredible work with very small resources. So we're not impoverished, we're not bereft, and we're not stupid. We're just not doing enough of the right things in a coherent way to have a real strategy. I think people want to believe there's a strategy, that if we do certain things, we'll get to where we're going.
So if you established a strategy and you had a magic wand, right?
Okay.
All right. Money's not an issue, okay? What are the first 3 to 5 things that you would do?
Well, the first thing I would do is invest in early childhood education for every kid in New Mexico. You've got to get out of this cycle of poverty. You've got to tell parents, many of whom are not educated, that they are their kids' first teachers, and you've got to do what you described, which is teach them how to do that. And there is some money in the upcoming budget to do that. Not enough, because when you're starting as far behind as we are, you got to really apply yourself. So if you want to get out of this vicious circle, you start with early childhood education. You increase the minimum wage, because we have a lot of people who are working 2 and 3 jobs, which then makes them less effective parents because they're not there to be good parents. I think you begin to work with your small and medium-sized companies. The governor or other people are proposing a $50 million quote-unquote closing fund to bring companies from out of state. My alternative is, how about a $5 million planning fund for county-by-county economic development strategies that work with small and medium-sized companies so we know what they believe they need to grow. The president's giving a speech today in, I think, Iowa, on high-speed internet for small communities. More than 50% of the small and medium-sized businesses in New Mexico have no presence on the internet. This is 2015, folks. If you are not on the web, you don't exist, right? So we have a guy here, Jared Tarbell, who is one of the founders of Etsy, that helps every small person be a business person. We ought to be the most Etsified state in America. And instead, more than 50% of our companies aren't even on the web. They don't even have a web page. They don't have a Facebook page. They don't have a high-speed connection to the internet. If you want to think about infrastructure investment, Great, let's talk about roads, highways, air service, but let's not overlook internet and high-speed connectivity. Job training, everybody has said it this morning. You know, CNM, job training, making it Las Vegas. Am I right about that? Or Española cut out their auto training program for high school kids. Well, this is a state where people love their cars. Why are we not making it possible for people to earn a good living working with their hands? Those are good jobs, right? But we've said we're not going to train you to do that. We should invest in on-the-job training. We've got to make it clear that manual labor is an honorable way to make a living. Being a tour guide on a bus is a knowledge worker, right? So why don't we make that clear that New Mexico says if you want to work with your hands, we're a state that believes in that kind of real, good, old-fashioned hard work. I think we ought to, you know, my 9 microeconomies of New Mexico, I think, is a pretty sensible path forward. I'll give you a very small example. In America today, one of the hottest things on college campuses is food and nutrition. Every young kid that I ever met was a foodie. We are a state that ought to be the home of organic farming, branded ranching, right? We've got chilies, but why don't we have more than that? Why don't we have cheese and all kinds of organic vegetables that are going from farm to table? Well, we're doing some of it, but that's not a focus. It ought to be a focus. Let's celebrate rural farming New Mexico, ranching New Mexico. We're number 2 in solar potential in America. We're number 22 in solar jobs. What's the disconnect? That's stupid. That's an opportunity staring us in the face. And right now there's a proceeding going on for the next 10 days. PNM has its alternative plan for dealing with the Four Corners energy production. How much solar are they saying they're going to produce? How much wind are they saying they're going to produce compared to nuclear and coal? Why aren't we pushing our state to be at the forefront of renewables?
Is that one of your 9 micro economies?
Yeah, absolutely. Another one is arts and culture. It's a $1 billion industry in New Mexico. The rest of the country is hungry for this authentic cultural experience, for Native American arts, for religious art, from Spanish art, from all this stuff that New Mexico, we take it for granted. But if you, again, imagine a hookup between high-speed internet, so you don't have to worry about, is everybody coming to New Mexico to come to my gallery? All of a sudden, the world is shopping New Mexico art and culture. Why are we not appifying tourism? We should, this is 2015. We should be getting rid of maps and moving to apps, so that when people who are young and interested in authentic experiences come to New Mexico, they take out their smartphone and they download where do I get the best breakfast burritos in New Mexico?
There actually is an app for that, I think.
There ought
for
to be.
burritos.
If there isn't, there should be.
I think there is.
There ought to be the wine tour of New Mexico. We have the oldest vineyards in America. We ought to download the apps where all the movies were made in New Mexico. You want to go see where No Country for Old Men was filmed? Here, click on this and it'll take you there. Appifying New Mexico then gets the kids who are in high school and in college making apps. And you look at what Bloomberg did in New York with hackathons. We ought to sponsor hackathons so that our kids think, to your point, you can be a techie and an entrepreneur and stay in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Right? So, I don't think this stuff is outside of our reach. And it's not expensive. I don't even know. This is a question that I haven't researched, but is there a New Mexico Commission on Entrepreneurship and Innovation appointed by the governor or an authority, so that all over the state we have representatives coming to a commission saying, how do we take this instinct for entrepreneurship? How do we take the labs? How do we take coding? How do we take appification and hackathons and innovate ABQ and 10, which is the Taos Entrepreneurial Network, put these pieces together in a statewide network so that we're using our resources to be the next cool place where kids want to be. That's not hard to do. And right now, one of our advantages is, if you look at the hot spots in entrepreneurship, it's Boulder, it's Austin, Silicon Valley. Nobody can afford to live there anymore, right? So
right.
if you say to people in Boulder, young kids in Boulder, you know what, Albuquerque's just as cool. The quality of life is just as good. We've got skiing, we got all that great stuff, but it's a lot cheaper. Move here and we'll help you be an entrepreneur in Albuquerque or in Taos or in Las Cruces or in Santa Fe. I think we become the next cool place to be. And that's there to be done.
There's
I
a
was
marketing
having-
project for you.
I was having that discussion with Dennis Houston at AED over lunch the other day, because they're all about recruiting companies to come here, which is not a bad thing, you know.
Yeah, if they
need
want to
companies
come,
here.
God bless them.
But I submitted, I said, well, I would suggest that instead of recruiting companies to come here, we're recruiting people to come here.
Yes.
Reach out to those young, innovative, entrepreneurial, and young can be 85. I don't care. I've got a friend that's 76 getting ready to start another company. Reach out to those people, because once we get those people here, it will be organic and growth.
Right.
People will start saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. They're not going to listen to, we've never done it that way, you can't do it in New Mexico. So we need to get more of those people, not necessarily the companies. The companies will come if the people are here.
That's right. You know, work is personal.
Yeah,
The unit
absolutely.
of measurement is, what can one really brilliant entrepreneur produce that takes off? And by the way, you get a critical mass, and then they're taught the whole purpose of co-working spaces, which is a big deal all over the world, is how do we get a critical mass of people who are having random interactions, bumping into each other, out of which comes something nobody could have anticipated. That's a huge opportunity, and the cost of living and the quality of life here is such, we ought to be able to get those folks to be, if they're here to stay and to be part of something that's cool, and if they're not here, to see, oh hey, that seems to be the next cool place to go. Let's go be part of this new emerging scene. I think it's doable.
Well, I would submit we go places like Portland, Oregon, or so. You're tired of it raining 362 days a year. We have coffee and beer in Albuquerque. Come on down. I mean, seriously.
Well, I have another idea. I have an idea I tried to give away. It was given to me by a guy in San Francisco who's an old friend. And he is a young guy. He's been a consultant his whole life for people like IDEO and the kind of leading consulting firms. In 2006, 2007, he and a friend of his started a business. It got wiped out by the 2008 crash. So his idea was, he said, I've been to Santa Fe, I've been to New Mexico. It's really a cool place. The quality of life is great. He said, rather than having, this thing that everybody laughs about, the island of broken toys, you ought to make New Mexico the island of failed entrepreneurs. And you give people who have failed in Silicon Valley, you set up a reality TV show without the TV show, and you say, we're going to have a competition where 10 failed entrepreneurs can come from Silicon Valley, and for 1 year we'll put you up in a house in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and we'll keep you going. All you have to do is every month give a speech to a group or be publicly available, and at the end of the year, any businesses that you guys start have to stay here in New Mexico. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I like that.
It's low cost. It's funny. People get it. It's like, oh yeah, the island of failed entrepreneurs. That's so clever. It's okay to be a failure, right? It's celebrating failure rather than apologizing for it. And you get people to come here who are smart. They know they're not failures. They know they got wiped out by bad effects. And by the way, in Silicon Valley, venture capitalists say if there isn't a failure on an entrepreneur's resume, they haven't tried hard enough. They haven't overreached themselves enough. Show me an entrepreneur who hasn't failed, and I'll show you an entrepreneur who hasn't tried hard enough. So I think, why don't we become the plan B for all these entrepreneurs, and then they come here and then they say, hey, I'm here, it's great. I think I'll stay put. Anyway, I've been trying to give that idea away for about 2 years now. Nobody wants it. So
Well, I have it now.
all right.
Oh, sure, we're going to do this.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of what's on my mind. And I think, I do think we have a lot of challenges. Obviously, we're still ranking low in so many categories. But the fun part of going around and running for office is you see all the resources. And it's waiting to happen. I don't think it's, and I think, by the way, the wind is coming back into the sails of the economy nationally. Job growth is up. Individual spending is okay. It's not back the way it was, but that may have been an aberration. The qualities that are going to matter are clear: education, training, investment, entrepreneurship, collaboration between the different sectors. I've always said that this is something I learned in Oregon, and it's been true ever since. We've got these categories. We call them business, government, and nonprofit. We organize our reality into those categories. Unfortunately, reality doesn't organize itself into those categories. So what we end up doing is creating barriers where we ought to be working across those barriers. And the most effective solutions to any problem happens when there is more of a Venn diagram and overlap rather than stovepipe thinking. So getting even the smallest kinds of collaborative ventures going, where business and nonprofits and governments are collaborating on a small little problem and they work on it, or it's a disaster and they have to work together. Hurricane Katrina, the most responsive organization in the United States, there were two, neither of which was FEMA. The first was General Motors. General Motors, I went to their OnStar room in Detroit. They've got a big room with a wall the size, or a map the size of that wall, where every time somebody hits an OnStar button in a GM car, a light lights up. So when Katrina hit, GM knew where everybody in a GM vehicle was stranded, because they were all hitting their OnStar help button. FEMA didn't know, GM knew. And the other great response came from Walmart, that's got the most amazing logistics operation in America, and they mobilized water and blankets and food. They had trucks rolling down to help people in Louisiana, and FEMA is not working. Well, you could argue it wasn't GM's business to help people or Walmart's business to help people, but in a crisis it is. So we're in a crisis. Why don't we all help each other? Why doesn't the private sector and the public sector and the nonprofits and the religious communities say, okay, for the next 5 years, we're going to suspend disbelief and we're going to get rid of the barriers and we're going to find ways to collaborate. I do think the leadership will come from the private sector because it's focused on results and pragmatism, and you don't have to get reelected every 2 to 4 years. So you can actually stake out an agenda that makes sense and then go to state and local officials and say, look, let's stop the ideology stuff. Let's talk about pragmatic results that lead to better solutions.
Bravo.
And that's what I think.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Hey! Comes back to your ask too about being progressively oriented towards the future and being very pragmatic.
Yeah, I think that combination makes it. And by the way, I think New Mexico is a very pragmatic state.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to marry this sort of notion of how do we get from our tradition into a transition? How do we put the pieces together?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've made a lot of progress. When I moved back here 18 years ago, looking just one microcosm example, Albuquerque Central Avenue is far better than it used to be. And they're doing a lot of things at the civic level that you didn't see before. I mean, Albuquerque's using far less water as a city than it did back in the 1980s.
Yep.
So we have to celebrate our success and build on those versus sitting around and whining about all the things that are wrong.
Right.
And I find that the less I hang out with people that whine about all the reasons they can't do something, the better off we all are. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be pragmatic and realistic. You shouldn't walk around with rose-colored glasses and say everything's fine, because it's not. But we do have to solve the problems, and we're not going to do it by depending on the government or any one entity to fix it. I'm sorry, I got a soapbox.
No,
That's what.
welcome.
But
This
these are
is
things
a
I'm really-
soapbox corner.
I'm really passionate about that, and it's very frustrating to see that so many people can't think outside the box. Tom Peters and I had this discussion via blogging years ago. He and I got into it back and forth back when everybody was still blogging each other. And he was talking about, own the box! And I said, yes, but you both need a box. You gotta start with something. You kind of understand what you're burning
Yet
before you
there's
can
so
burn
much
it.
low-hanging fruit, though. I
I
mean,
know.
there really is.
That's absolutely right. And frankly, success breeds more success.
Yeah.
So once you start, that's why I think
Yeah.
starting small
Mm-hmm.
and demonstrating the capacity to collaborate and get something positive going, and then you build on it. And I wrote a book a few years back called Rules of Thumb, 52 Truths for Winning at Business without, I don't even remember the title, Winning at Business Without Losing Yourself. One of the examples comes from Portland. In Oregon, in Portland back when I was working for the mayor, the city went through an extensive downtown planning exercise, which was stimulated when the most valuable block in the city was about to be turned into a parking lot. And everybody said, whoa, wait a minute. If we turn our most valuable block in downtown Portland into a parking lot, we have just really made a strategic mistake of long-standing disaster. So let's stop and do a plan for downtown. So they did a plan. Took a bunch of time, took some money, and at the end they had a great big thick book. And everybody said, speaking of whining, oh great, another plan, it's a doorstop, it's a paperweight, nothing will ever happen. The mayor, who was at the time all of about 34 years old, looked at the plan and said, what is the one thing we could do that would produce real confidence? Went up to Seattle, sat down with the Nordstrom family, and said, it's been 20 years since we had a new department store in downtown Portland. There's a block here in the downtown plan that says it would be a great place for a department store. What will it take for you to build a department store in downtown Portland? And the Nordstroms, who, as you know, are Boy Scouts, and they're salt of the
They're
earth,
wonderful.
amazing people. The Nordstrom family said, okay, we'll invest in downtown Portland. The block was turned into a department store. From that moment on, everybody said, hey, this plan is real. It actually is doable. People are making things happen. What else can we do? Momentum and a little iconic win.
Mm-hmm.
If you get an iconic win,
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to be on a winning team.
Mm-hmm.
And then you build, how do I join that club?
Mm-hmm.
How do I be part of that?
And that's what I think they're trying to do here at Windward.
Yeah.
Just
That's a
piece-
great example. Yeah.
Yeah,
I live
piece
a
by
mile from
piece.
One Rock. And I have asked Gary Goodman a couple of times about, what are you doing over here? What are you, whatever? And, but what I found very encouraging was not so much what he was doing, but his attitude. Very positive, very excited, very progressive. if you
And
will.
optimistic.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges I see in it, and I'll pick on breast cancer. We have probably 6 or 8 not-for-profits that deal with breast cancer in Mexico, or more.
Yeah.
And you got 8 administrations, you got 8 different fundraisers.
Right.
They're all doing the same thing.
Right.
But they're all doing, so the challenge, and it's entrepreneurial spirit.
Yes.
Somebody wants their name on it, it's entrepreneurial spirit, all good,
Right.
but we gotta harness it, because
That's right.
if you had one administration and 2 or 3 development officers, they probably get a heck of a lot more money into the system.
And more results.
And
out
more
of the
results.
system.
Yeah,
I think that's also, I think, a part of what we will be gradually evolving over time. I think the the game is changing about philanthropy even, you know, and so you see people wanting to put their money into something that actually produces an outcome. And as that happens, then it'll become in everybody's interest. Even if you're a small little 1 or 2 person nonprofit, you'll say, okay, I really want to be part of something that gets results. I'm willing to give up something to get something. That's the conversation that's going on right now with the community foundations in New Mexico. How do we, everybody's got their own little tent, and it's nice, it's good, it gives me a sense of pride, local pride, that there's a Santa Fe Community Foundation and a Taos Community Foundation, and there's a Albuquerque and a Cruces Community Foundation and a New Mexico community. Wouldn't it be better if we figured out a way to make it more efficient and more effective? And
Well, it's very frustrating to people that want to support the nonprofit.
Right.
That's another one of my soapbox issues, is that, and I've done a lot of fundraising and served on boards and all of that, but you're going out and looking at all of these 200, last time I looked there were 252 nonprofits or something in New Mexico, some incredible number.
It's like
And,
5,000.
you know, they're asking me for my money, and I would love to give them money, but there's 45 other people asking me for sort of kind of the same thing.
right.
So I would love to see an effort to help the nonprofits kind of come together and collaborate. I did find that a challenge though when I was working with the Albuquerque Independent Business Alliance, and I had this, I guess I was suffering from Barack Obama syndrome or something. We're all gonna work together, we'll be community organizers, whatever. I would go to the other associations, and the neighborhood associations, and the merchants associations. I couldn't get anybody to sit down and work with it.
Yeah, it's
Well,
tricky.
more and more funders now, because nonprofit is my bailiwick, but more and more funders now are asking about collaborations. And if somebody comes to me with a brand new nonprofit or an idea, one of the things I always say is there somebody already doing what you want to do? Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
Well, let's look into that. Maybe you can work with them.
Right.
You know, maybe you can bring your expertise to them, or small nonprofits that merge and come together to cut down on things like overhead and so on, so they can serve their communities better.
And I also think that the growth in the private sector will help too. You know, if you have more successful private sector ventures,
Right.
then the dependence on government and nonprofits begins to diminish, and people want to do, in general, people want to work where there's a winner and go where the action is. And it's more fun to be part of where the action is than where the action isn't. So if all of a sudden people are saying, you know what, the private entrepreneurship, small businesses are growing in New Mexico, that's a great place to put your put your footprint. I think folks who have been maybe migrating to the nonprofit world because there's a chance to make a difference there will say, well, I can also make a difference if I work for a up and coming private sector operation. I got to drive north, you guys.
Okay.
I know,
Uh-oh.
I know. Hopefully you'll make it.
I'll make it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Let me know when you want to do it again.
Absolutely.
It's fun for me.